أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم برضوان إلى يوم الدين. So today supposed to start with Juz 9, but I'm going to be taking surahs as units rather than Juz as units. As we all know, Juz is an artificial, arbitrary division of the Quran made for the purpose of dividing it into 30 days of recitation. And it was done by literally counting the number of words in the Quran and dividing them into equal parts so that the Quran can be divided into 30 juz. The division that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed with the Quran is the division between ayahs and the division of surahs, which is the formal division that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed and determined for us. And so even in my personal recitation, I tend to follow surahs more than the juz, although I'll try to recite equivalent to a juz, but not necessarily exactly a juz, depending on where the surah is ending. I will not leave a surah hanging or start a surah where I have already recited a one page out of multiple pages of the surah. So that's how I follow, and I think that's the method I will follow in my presentation as well, although I will roughly follow the juz as we go along. Surah is the unit that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed, and if you read surahs, you will find that every surah has its own unique character, its own distinct features, its own rhythm, and it evokes a different kind of emotional response from us based on its formulation of words, its rhythm, its subject matter. Some will bring you to tears, some will bring you to joy, some will bring you to a deep thinking. And so all those different emotions that man knows, each of these surahs contain in their totality a very particular temperament through which these surahs try to convey a particular response from human beings. And I think the Quran is organized in this way because Quran deals with humans. And we humans recognize that even though we all have a base characteristics that are common between us, a biological, physical base in which we recognize who a human is and who is not, who is a person and who is not. But each one of us, regardless of our appearance, even if we may appear very similar to another person, inside us we are all very unique persons affected by the same words being spoken will have different effect on different persons and different effect at different times in the life of those different persons. So there's such a variety of human emotions and human intellect. And so I think if you read Quran from beginning to end, you will go through all those ups and downs of human emotions and intellectual analysis as you go through the Quran from beginning to the end. And so the Quran mimics the nature on which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us as human beings. So although this surah started in Juz 8 and we are supposed to do Juz 9 today, but the surah continues to Juz 9, and it is at the boundary of Juz 8 and Juz 9. And so I'm going to take up this surah as a whole today and discuss some of the distinct characteristics of this surah, Surah Al-A'raf. To me personally, I find this surah to be one of the most powerful surahs of the Quran. Although every time I say this, I think that I shouldn't say this about any surah of the Quran. And my own personal experience is that after I've done reciting a surah and I'm amazed by the effect it had on me, and I started reciting next surah, and I think that's greater surah than the one before. And I always have difficulty trying to determine which surahs I should memorize based on my liking of the surahs. It's very difficult to make that decision. But regardless of that, I think this Surah Al-Araf conveys some very fundamental things about us as human beings. And it is important to recognize that aspect of the surah. And the whole surah to me appears as one single unit discussing one singular subject matter. And it starts that subject matter by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's description, where he says in the beginning of the surah, وَلَقَدْ مَكَّنَّاكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ فِيهَا مَعِيشًا قَلِيلًا مَا تَشْكُرُونَ. That it is we who have established you on this earth, and we who have created your livelihood on the earth, your living on the earth, your whole culture and civilization on the earth. Ma'ish includes all of those senses. قَلِيلًا مَا تَشْكُرُونَ, but little are you grateful for it. So this surah is about us, humans. And it starts from this description from which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts. And so from there we go on a whole sequence of events that the surah walks us through from the beginning to towards the end of the surah. The beginning of the surah starts by the event of the creation of man. And so the journey starts with that creation, and then continues that journey, taking you through all the ups and downs of human beings in this life, their struggles with truth, their denial of the truth, the messengers and what response they received, and how human beings used or abused this power of choice that was unique to human beings, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to human beings. So in that, first and foremost, we need to recognize the story of the creation of Adam, which is the story of our beginning as human beings. And it is a very significant and important story in the sense that it clearly defines who we are. And in the absence of that, there is no definition of us. In the absence of her, we are some kind of life form on this earth, which has somehow come into being, which has no direction, no purpose, nowhere to go, except to make his life as best as possible in this world. Just like animals come and go from this earth, we become like that. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the creation of Adam alayhi salam as a very distinct event that happened. A distinct event that started with announcement before the angels, even before the creation. It was such a significant event that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala announced before angels that he is going to create a new creation. Although that announcement is not mentioned in the story of Adam as we find it in this Surah Al-Araf, but it is in the Surah Al-Baqarah that we just went through. إِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala announced to the angels that I'm going to create a creation on the earth. Not only that he announced that creation on the earth, once he has created Adam alayhi salam, he starts by asking angels to formally acknowledge this creation. And I think the significance of the statement which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions is also in the Surah Al-A'raf. قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ لَمْ يَكُنْ مِنَ السَّاجِدِينَ. That event and the significance of that event is that not only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created man, but he asked that the angels, who will be responsible for interacting with us in this world, to formally recognize, to formally acknowledge this creation. And that is the meaning of the being asked to make sajda, to submit to the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made this creation and had made a distinction in that creation, in that he's giving this creation a sense of choice, a power, a voluntary nature that does not belong to the heavens and the earth. Everything else that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates is bound within a system in which they submit tawan or karhan, whether they willingly or unwillingly, they all submit to that creation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts our story of creation from the announcement, then asking the angels to acknowledge our creation, and then the event that follows with the shaitan of setting a scene in which there is a permanent opposition created for us up until the end of this world, and which was in the form of shaitan, who up until that point had absolutely done nothing wrong. And he was so high in character that he was asked to sit among the angels, was made an enemy of man. Aduwwan lakum. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself describes shaitan in the Quran as aduw, as the enemy of man. So it is from this point that man's life starts. And his life starts not in any ordinary circumstances. His life starts by announcement in the company of the highest of the beings, the angels. And then creation before the angels. And then being placed in the paradise. You didn't start in this world, you started in paradise. And then being sent down to this earth to fulfill the purpose for which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us. And so this is a noble start of the journey. Is the as noble start of the journey as is possible in this whole concept of universe, and who has one creator who created the whole world. This is as noble a start of the journey as possible. And it is important to fully recognize the nobleness of human journey and its beginning of the human journey. That man in its origin was created as right noble, in a right noble company with a pure fitra, which is what Prophet ﷺ describes as the nature, as the fitra. Fitra is the word that comes from fatara. Fatara means to split something, but also means to as an event of that split for some creation to come into being. As we recognize, almost all life forms come into this world by bursting out from something or somewhere. And so in that sense, the fatara, the word fatara indicates the process of the creation through which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us. And so he says your origin is good. In your core, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created you a good being. He hasn't created you bad. He hasn't created you a permanent sinner. You don't carry the burden of any sin or original sin or any such thing in the concept that Quran teaches about man in this world. Man is a noble being created in the company of angels and then placed in paradise and then sent down to this world for a very limited amount of time to be tested regarding his conduct. Now, I don't want to discuss all the theories about the biological process of creation and how there is similarities in the physical, biological similarities between us and other life that we find on this earth. And because of those similarities, and those similarities go from the very base level to very evolved, very complex organisms. And we see that organisms are found in the world which are simplistic, and then the organisms that are very complex. And based on this observation, people think that the life form slowly changed from the simple to the complex. It slowly evolved into that, in that way. And I don't know if maybe that was the process that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses. That process doesn't negate Allah being the creator, because that could have been the biological process. Just like there is a biological process of how we develop in the womb from stages and we come into being in this world through those stages. It is possible. I mean, I cannot be sure because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't give us that information. But what we are absolutely sure about is that man came into being as a conscious being, as an intellectual being, as a person who is responsible and accountable for his actions, was definitely a discrete event. Because if you look around in the world, there is no evolution in intelligence. No other being becomes more intelligent with the passage of time. Bees still make honey the way they used to make 1,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, however far you want to go back to the world. The bees live and survive and live on the food, and the process of getting that food and their livelihood hasn't changed. The habitation of all other life forms, where they live, how they make their life, what kind of environment they live, hasn't changed, evolved. But if you look at human beings, they are constantly, based on the intelligence that Allah has given us, is evolving. Similarly, we as human beings understand that we are the only ones accountable for our actions. No one else is. If your animal that you have, your cow or your dog or whatever you are caring for, goes and causes harm to someone, then that animal is not going to be the one taken to account for it and be punished for it or be taken to in front of a court. Sometimes it is the owner who may still be held responsible for what his animal did, because the man is the one who is responsible for it. So this sense of accountability of man, which is inherent in man, even if you deny akhirah, appearing before Allah, all day of judgment and everything, the whole system of holding people accountable for their actions, for even civil life, civic life, regardless of the guidance, that concept is with man constantly. And it is very discreetly with man. So it has to be a discrete event and not an event that man slowly. There is no evolution in intellect. We suddenly jump from all other life forms to human beings with such enhanced intellectual power, such enhanced power to analyze data, to analyze his world, to think about his world and all of that. That is a power for which there is no parallel in the world. Because you can show biological evolution, but you cannot show intellectual evolution. You cannot show evolution in human thinking and thought and in the same way in any other being. So in that sense, human creation was a distinct event. And so that is where the story of Adam alayhi salam is so essential and so important to understand the reality of who we are. But the surah, and the most powerful part of the surah, is that then it immediately, after describing the event of the creation of Adam, moves to a situation where he creates before us an imagery as vivid as any living event that we may recognize, of people appearing before Allah. And people appearing before Allah and then being divided into all these different groups. There are those who will be rejoicing by calling out, قَدْ وَجَدْنَا مَا وَعَدَنَا رَبُّنَا حَقًّا. فَهَلْ وَجَدْتُمْ Ma wa'adakum rabbukum haqqa. And so it creates that vivid image before us. Then it creates image of other people same time, about whom an announcement will be made. Azzana mu'adhdhinun. An announcement will be made, La'natullahi ala zalimeen, that Allah's curse be on all the wrongdoers. And then there will be people in between. وَعَلَى الْأَعْرَافِ رِجَالٌ يَعْرِفُونَ كُلًّا بِسِيمَاهُمْ. On the hill, there will be people who will be standing and observing. They were not the wrongdoers, but were indifferent and neutral and didn't concern themselves with what was around them world. Maybe that is the definition of them. They will recognize all these different people. They will recognize that we recognize the wrongdoers in the world. We recognize the righteous in the world, but they refused to actively become part of any of that. Maybe that's what the definition of this is. I'm just not saying who the exact Shari or fiqhi definition of who those persons are. And so they were indifferent. They didn't concern themselves. They left themselves hanging in between in this world. And so they are the ones who will be left hanging in Akhirah. That they will be hoping to enter paradise, but don't have enough to enter paradise. They haven't done enough wrong to be thrown into the hellfire. So that is a picture that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates before us. But when we think and reflect on these verses, we must also reflect on what it is conveying regarding us as humans. The variety of spectrum in which we will find our verses. I mean, here I only described 3, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described there will be grades in the Akhirah. Grades in the Akhirah, وَلَلْ آخِرَةِ أَكْبَرُ دَرَجَاتٍ وَأَكْبَرُ تَفْضِيلًا. That there will be, you recognize these levels and status and how people achieve certain status, and you recognize all these differences between human beings in this world. In Akhirah, those differences will be even greater. In Akhirah, people will be in the highest level of paradise, and then all the way down, and all the way coming down to the Ashab al-Araf. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes people of the hypocrites whom fi darkil asfal minan nar, that there will be a lowest portion of the hellfire, and then there will be other portions of the hellfire. So what it is conveying is that our conduct, our behavior, our understanding, our sticking to any rules or principles, we all have all these variations of extreme wrong to extreme righteous and everyone in between. We oftentimes forget this. What happens when we start to look at the world as black and white? And we start to look at the world as black and white, and we start to judge people based on that black and white. Either a person is black or white in terms of his deeds, in terms of his conduct, in terms of his righteousness. And so we must recognize that there are levels in everything. And that recognition of that levels is important, how we deal with people, how we interact with people. We cannot create distinctions in a way. We are in this world, we are constantly searching for certainty. Also in the fiqh matters, when we come to fiqh, we go and start shopping around and start asking everyone to give us a very definitive answer about some issue, where we find that Allah has left room to have differences of opinion. And we seek, why can't all these scholars come together and decide on one thing and declare that this is it? And it troubles us, it frustrates us. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us as human beings with all this variety and all this variation that we must recognize as the nature of our creation. And we cannot divide the world in this manner of where we categorically place people in one basket or the another basket. So we must recognize this differences. So that is the second story that Surah Al-Araf creates, and you can see how it transitions from the beginning of the man to the end of the man, from the creation before angels and then standing before Allah. And then once he describes the beginning and the end, then Surah continues. Then Surah continues with the stories of the prophets and human struggle with the truth and human interactions with each other and the responses to the prophets and variations of those responses and their denials and the good people and the bad people and the behavior of the good people and the bad people. And so you see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings before us example after example after example from historical context to make it clear to us as to what behavior is acceptable before Allah and will be rewarded, and what behavior is unacceptable before Allah and will be rejected. And so you can see how beautifully this whole surah takes you through a journey of your creation, to your struggles in this life, to appearing before Allah and made accountable for your deeds. So I'm going to end here, inshallah, about this surah. This was an overall view of the surah and what it contains. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم.